also here, in this video, some will ask, well, given that indeed is the case, couldn't it be possible that Nicola Bulley, she perhaps had some suicidal tendencies, or she deliberately threw herself in? Again, originally that could be possible, folks. But as I'm showing you in this video, now that's largely irrelevant. Because if she had done what they're suggesting that she did, which is she then deliberately placed the phone down and then she jumped into the river on her own, right? The call log registry wouldn't have been deleted the way it was. Even if she was going to go ahead and she was going to deliberately jump in, or even in the situation perhaps she had a freak accident, for example, it wouldn't show the call log the way that it did, with various calls and things like that from the previous day, but apparently no true call history for the hours before this took place. Again, it can't be explained. So I lean towards the fact that, yes, it could have been a very serious accident where she hit her head or something like that. It's always possible. But the more possible and plausible explanation is usually the correct one, and that is, this was foul play. She was probably pushed in. And a lot of people think, well, obviously then it has to do with all these Freemasonic symbols and on all these other different things. And again, folks, I'm not ruling out the fact that some of those elements might be in play here, but that's simply not what occurred in this situation and case. And I'm going to show that to you, given the fact that John Tuten, or John Tuten, okay, in this example, is kind of the so-called puppet master in a lot of ways in regards to this. And maybe he had certain associations with Freemasonic symbols and things. Could be. But maybe it's all irrelevant anyway, because it wasn't orchestrated in a way, folks, like a huge group of them were doing this or something to that effect. It was mainly John Tuten, okay, who was involved. And that's why I'm showing you. And we go to this area here, and you see that he's here, this interesting house, I suppose you might say that, in Lancashire, and how he might certainly possibly be involved and connected to this situation as time goes on. Because the truth is, all that matters here is not who done it, ultimately, but, again, that it wasn't, obviously, an accident. So someone in the circle that's directly related with John Tuten, if you want to say that way, that's fine, went ahead and made this occur. And they made Nicola Bulley essentially disappear. They don't need any real conspiracy. I'm tired of the conspiracy theorists. They don't need a conspiracy to do that. They just need a few people to say, you know what? We don't like what Nicola is doing with the real estate. Let's get rid of her. And that's it. And that's exactly what I'm suggesting may have occurred in this situation. They went ahead and they talked about it. And somebody there, not a part of some elaborate conspiracy, but just a part of the circle, small little group, who does nefarious things sometimes with John Tuten directly involved, they decided, they acted, they probably had her thrown in the river or shoved in the river. One or the other. Either way, the truth has to always come out. Thank you. I'm going to wonder, for some of you, where exactly I am. And this is quite interesting, because this is a peculiar area. This is right outside of Lancashire, United Kingdom, in a place called Lenova South, Victoria Street, Westminster. It's kind of a cross from Lancashire. What is interesting, of course, is, as you will see here, this is a company address. This is supposed to be for a company. But the Black Sheep Coffee is directly across the street. And the Victoria Underground Station, which, believe it or not, has access back into Lancashire and then directly over to Westminster again anytime you want, right, is directly across from this company. Now, they call this company Greenwood. They're trying to sell it as it's kind of a bar slash restaurant and so on, and kind of business office type of area, and hangout for really important executives. One of the details here that is very strange is the fact that the business card, the business information for one of these places was actually, it appears at this stage, was actually possibly part of some of the belongings that Nicola had been carrying with her. Now, this address has been coming up a lot, and you may be wondering more, how exactly did this address get arrived at, right? We see this, the London Taxi Drivers Charity Support Service Center, and it's very interesting. It's interesting, folks, because where this address came from is it was the prior position for John Tuten. That's correct. John Tuten, who's been known to travel through Lancashire and so on. That same John Tuten, where he worked as the senior director of apparently law, and also almost the vice president type of position, you could say, to a service firm called WCL Services Limited. Now, this company has some interesting documents associated with it, and it is near Lancashire. So literally, John Tuten, as you'd say, anyway, he has some affiliations with this kind of architecture firm in Georgia, and he had his own company, which is fairly unusual, actually, called the WCL Services Limited, where he kind of was a partner of sorts or something, of some type, until he resigned. And he was a partner with this WCL Services Limited, in law. It has kind of this interesting restaurant inside it and things like that. Before he resigned, and yet this building, with the office and with all the legal offices and some of the legal documents, which kind of narrows down where he has been staying in the United Kingdom and so on. It's all right here, folks, directly next to a train station that goes back and forth underneath, well, basically the outskirts of Lancashire. So, John Tuten, as it were, that people have made rumors about, he has a family crest in the UK. He seems to be a very important person. Well, he has some strange addresses, right? Yeah, most certainly. And one of those addresses that's very strange is, although he's not, it claims that he's not there anymore. WCL Services Limited was right there in Westminster, London, on Victoria Street. SW1E5LB, something, the suite number, until he apparently resigned. And this is related to the fact that because he's, connected to Christopher Wright, and he's, of course, related to the Tuten family directly, that it stands to reason, at least, he probably knew some interesting things about Nicola Bulley, such as where she lived, given that WCL Services worked with a lot of real estate companies. He likely would have known certain interesting things about these people that are seen as more beneath his pedigree, so he probably would know, he kind of know different things about where they worked, where they allegedly would go to school, perhaps, where some of them might even reside, or live. And it's a very interesting distinction. And trying to see exactly where his home address, right, is, I'm going to look at that for a moment. But it's been difficult to actually get his full street address. I wonder why. At James John Tuten's official home address, essentially, outside of Lancashire. A very unusual place. And unfortunately, this is over here on Hayward Street. This is not actually John Tuten's official address. It's James John Tuten is his name. Same sort of interesting, shady family, meaning it's John Tuten's cousin. The reason why I went to this address instead for now is John Tuten himself apparently moved out of the area next to Lancashire where he was originally and moved back to Virginia State. But the same rules apply here, so I wanted people to really get a feel of what's going on. This is James John Tuten, essentially his real, actual, original cousin. And he has a very almost gothic looking style house, like you might see in an old, I would just say run of the mill Dracula film almost, or something. In any case, not a very great individual. We'll have to get to back to Mr. John Tuten's original house in one of the next videos, but certainly this area is self-explanatory. A lot of blacked out office windows, a lot of office firms that have been abandoned, and as you can see, any area where they might have been storing paperwork have literally been cleaned out. Everything has been removed, etc. So this is the type of person, right, that we have to consider now knew about Nicola Bulley, and certainly was perhaps watching her, correct? There's a lot of evidence here, and certainly some very good circumstantial evidence to show You know, these individuals, especially Mr. Tuten over here, Mr. James John Tuten, fairly creepy, right? Very strange kind of setting that they live in, most certainly. A lot of trucks that have no light in the windows, and a fairly creepy area, which is what I needed to prove here. Thank you. As confirmation, James John Thompson Tuten, the cousin of John Tuten, who also lived over on Christchurch Road of Virginia Water, somewhere on the other side of Lancashire. The company address was for Kilbrane Properties Limited, a specialized real estate company, which you might say, given some of the interesting documents that have been recorded on this just strange patch of individuals, was probably competition in some fashion to Nicola's real estate company. I could be totally wrong on that, but given some of the evidence I've come across, I highly doubt it now. Kilbrane Properties Limited was dissolved. And if it was just an innocuous real estate company, I don't see a real, true, valid reason for Mr. James Tuten to dissolve it, after a very short period of time in the West Sussex area. West Sussex, England. I thought that's where all of the, most famous business people and Alec Baldwin and so on travel to all the time. For what reason would James Tuten, automatically pack up shop? That's all I'm going to, point out on that. But there are other legal records which show these individuals are seemingly not that great, and perhaps some of them are a little nefarious. And again, you do have to admit, at least, folks, this is kind of strange to see that one of these individuals may have known about Nicola Bulley, may have run into her on her way to work, and they have offices which have been completely cleaned out, and literally everything has been blacked out in the windows. And apparently one of these offices in West Sussex has a building where all the seeming cars and so on look positively abandoned. All I am pointing out about this is it could mean absolutely nothing, but then again, when you look at the directorships, okay, folks, you start to look at the legal records, you see James Tuten has deleted his social profiles, and he dissolved these companies, including a real estate company that went bad. It starts to look a little bit strange. And at that stage is where I'm saying I strongly feel Mr. Tuten, some of the people that were probably perhaps involved in the real estate deal actually did something to Nicola Bulley, and that's really all there is to say about that. And perhaps one of them was tired of what was going on, and so they shoved her directly into the River Wear. We don't know. I am pointing out, though, what's been uncovered so far, just some of the hard evidence, some of the circumstantial evidence that's come along with it, is concerning enough for me to officially say, yes, Nicola Bulley definitely met an accident. And these men most likely and most certainly know more about how that occurred. Not to mention why it occurred. Thank you again. There will be more. Sometimes the simplest explanation seems like a logical one, but it really isn't logical at all, so to speak. And this is how I like to look at certain crime scenes. For example, if someone claims that the person involved was a heavy drunk or is heavily medicated on some kind of substance, or, all these similar things, right? These claims that are made. As a detective, one of the first signs that I look for is what was left behind at the actual scene of where this event occurred, okay? Is there anything solid, and I mean solid, a bottle, odor or something in the area perhaps, or a residue that has a sticky substance on it that turns out to be alcohol and so on, that would suggest and confirm that so-and-so was abusing alcohol in that area, okay? Is there something to suggest that on the cell phone, on the actual call records? That's something I check first thing as well. If there's not, I'm not going to automatically assume anymore, right, that the person is an alcoholic or was abusing some kind of heavy substance, right? Because it's normally always going to be some kind of telltale piece of evidence left behind that would suggest that that's exactly what happened. I look for, is there a prescription pill bottle perhaps? Is there residue somewhere, at least on the surface of the floors and so on, that suggest somebody was abusing drugs? Is there a narrative at play where we can talk to two reliable witnesses, that can confirm and affirm what happened in this area, that this person was actually using drugs? I look for all of those key items first, is the key. And if I don't find them, okay, I don't rule out the idea that somebody could be an alcoholic and could have made up a story or something like that. But I no longer accept it as the only viable answer. That's right. That's when I start to look at the other answer, or the other answers, plural, as possibly a much clearer alternative explanation. And I can't help it. This is how I do everything. I have always had this kind of mathematical equation-based mind. I don't look at things just on the surface, right? I want to look at every single aspect of a crime scene or of a scene that I enter to determine truly what makes the most sense. And if someone was walking their dogs, for example, and they were said to be a raging alcoholic, and they just, for example, were walking along and fell in the river, I expect to see something left behind, okay? Doesn't have to be anything major necessarily, but there needs to be a bottle with fingerprints on it showing that they were actually drinking. Makes perfect sense then. It starts to add to a proper theory. There has to be at least some residue, because there's residue left behind if someone's truly an alcoholic and they're running through the forest or whatever, correct? And when there's not that iconic odor, which you can pick up with kind of a little device, then that tells me there was not this alcoholic scenario, possibly. And there's something else that needs to be fully addressed and explored at minimum. So this is how I love to look at everything, right? Because a lot of people presumed, that's the key word, presumed in the Alex Murdaugh case that someone like Nathan Tuten could not possibly be involved. However, it turned out to be the exact opposite case. It turned out to be the case Nathan Tuten most likely was involved. And this is based upon firsthand evidence, okay, that people always miss. These are not even particularly extremely large issues. These can be minute details, these can be smaller details that people often skip over. And because they skip over them, they miss the forest for the trees. Okay? It was discovered Nathan Tuten's actual name was placed on many different legal records, legal documents. Okay? That's enough to finally confirm, circumstantially to a certain extent, that he was involved in the crime. Not only that, certain things were left behind that show cell phone data you cannot explain. That's what also, when doing reverse deductive reasoning, led people to start to conclude finally that yes, he was involved. So when I look at things like this, I don't look at them at just the obvious details. If I look at a scene, I don't want to look at it, right, from just I'm passing through this nice area, this nice scene, this nice crime scene, okay, for example. I want to look at it from a standpoint of what am I missing about this area? What am I missing about this situation? Not what am I seeing that automatically meets my conclusions. I'm looking at what am I missing, okay? And that's the key. And that's why a huge amount of my theories on this channel end up being correct, finally, okay? There are a lot of people who say, well, some of your theories don't add up sometimes. They don't make sense. However, if you go back to the actual area, you go back to the crime scene, you start looking at the same exact evidence, piece by piece, that I lay out on this channel, or that I have seen and run into myself, okay, you begin to realize, no, you're most likely right. Because based upon that evidence, you then, as a spectator, begin to understand that makes a lot of sense. You know, that makes the most common sense. But before you see the actual evidence, you're going to be like, that couldn't possibly be real. Just like I would if I had not encountered and seen the evidence for myself. Okay? So the key issue in detail here to realize, folks, all right, is no one, absolutely no one, gets a scene or a crime scene, in certain cases, correct the first time they go through it, or the second time. You have to keep going through it. And the key is you have to go through it over and over at certain points. Because when you do that, you begin to see exactly what this channel has talked about before as well, in certain cases, pieces of evidence, details, the things that were missing from your picture that begin to finally put the complete composite together, right? There are key items that are missing in a lot of crime scenes or a lot of scenes overall that we do not recognize because we're too busy looking for something else in the next scene over. When you spend a lot of time, and I mean really spend time with a scene, and specifically a crime scene, then and only then do you begin to see these missing details, the missing evidence, that gets you on the same page. And you start to realize, yes, there is something to this. There is something to this crime I did not know. And that is the key. That is the key. So again, folks, the other thing I wanted to discuss for a moment here is the number 23. Do you feel, or do you agree, or perhaps disagree, right, that the number 23 may have a significant part in this whole unfolding saga? And what I'm pointing out, you'll see in the video, you'll see part of it on the bench, right? The number 23 was found directly, essentially etched into the bench. And it's kind of an interesting result, an outcome, to see 23 days, right, is what it takes. And suddenly they find Nicola Bulley, what is allegedly Nicola, on the bank of the river more than a mile and 5,000 something feet away from the bench. Now, again, I'm not saying that I know everything of exactly what happened, but even the Crime Rocket Science channel has sometimes brought this up. Could there be something interesting about the connotation of the number 23? I don't know. I'm going to mention it though again because, of course, John Tuten and some similar folks that are there who apparently reside in that caravan park, they like numbers, and the number 23 is definitely an odd number, is what I'll say there. And as I've shown you in the video, the number 23 is apparently, for no explainable reason, is etched into the bench. So, pretty interesting. If perhaps there was an element of possible homicide here, could it have something to do with that number? I don't know. I don't think about things like Freemasonry being heavily, invested, involved in just simple things like that. However, I can't ignore the fact that the number 23 is interesting, and I'd like to hear what all of you have to say. So, if you can, sound off about what you feel the number 23 might mean, or if it means anything. Thank you.
3 on the bench where Nicola was last seen. The news reporter, the Asian guy, he's got a photo of that 23 this morning, and he's texted his mate and said, imagine she was found today, being the 23rd day, how weird would that be? And then it happened. That's what I would have thought. I wouldn't have thought she'd have gone in here 3 weeks later, turns up a mile downstream. And it would look like it's just been trapped coming around the bend in the water. And I'm going to show you guys that when we get there. Okay? The other thing to note here is the road. This place where she's been found is the only place along that river really where the road goes right up to the river, because I actually drove that road the first time I came up here, and I drove that road to get down to the estuary to try and film the divers going in the estuary.
Now, what is odd, is 23 steps, just about 23 steps from the bench, is kind of another tree that looks a little strange. So, who knows? I mean, do you feel like there might be something to this? It is unusual, right, that the number 23 is repeated like that. But sound off. What do you guys think? Do you feel like there may be something to this number 23 issue, and perhaps how the road was directly next to the area where Nicola is discovered, go ahead. Say what you believe. Thank you.